team of archaeologists at the University of Oregon have found one of North America's oldest human-occupied sites in southern Oregon.
What were the dates of those footprints?
I work for the Bureau of Land Management in Burns District. I've been the district archaeologist here for 21 years.
The stone scraper still carries blood. After 18,000 years buried in Oregon dirt, the tool tested positive for Bison antiquus, a massive Ice Age animal that went extinct millennia ago. This isn't contamination. This isn't a lab error. Archaeologists just pulled physical proof from the ground that humans hunted giant Ice Age beasts in North America thousands of years before they were supposed to exist here. And the camel tooth sealed beneath volcanic ash dated to 18,250 years before present. That's 5,000 years before humans were supposed to set foot on this continent. The tooth shows cut marks from stone tools. Someone butchered that 7-foot camel in Oregon, while glaciers still covered most of North America. Everything the textbooks taught us is about to collapse. The site that shouldn't exist. For decades, scientists believed they had solved the mystery of when humans reached North America. The Clovis first model said people arrived 13,000 years ago through an ice-free corridor between massive glacial sheets. Every textbook taught it. Every archaeology program built curriculum around it. Question the model, and your career ended. Then, a University of Oregon team started digging at Rimrock Draw, a shallow rock shelter carved into a low rise in the Oregon high desert. The kind of place you drive past without a second glance, surrounded by dry, empty terrain far from any coastline. For generations, archaeologists dismissed this entire region as irrelevant, too cold during the Ice Age, too isolated, too harsh to support human life when glaciers dominated the continent. Patrick O'Grady, district archaeologist for the Bureau of Land Management with over 2 decades of field experience, wasn't looking for ancient humans. The goal was simple and safe. Study Ice Age animals and track environmental changes. Based on everything the team knew, they expected shallow deposits, mixed soil, maybe some scattered animal bones left by predators. Nobody expected to find anything that mattered for human history. They were wrong. The first sign came almost immediately. The sediment layers appeared pristine. In most open shelters, soil turns chaotic over thousands of years. Roots penetrate downward. Burrowing animals mix deposits from different time periods. Water washes material from one level into another until the original sequence becomes unreadable. But at Rimrock Draw, the stratigraphy sat flat and undisturbed. Dark bands marked periods of activity. Light bands marked centuries of abandonment, stacked in perfect order like pages of a book that had waited thousands of years to be read. This kind of preservation almost never happens. Whatever lay beneath these layers could be trusted completely. The timeline wouldn't be corrupted. Each band represented a sealed moment in time. Stone tools started appearing, not random cracked rocks that skeptics could dismiss as natural fractures. Deliberately shaped implements with edges designed for cutting and scraping, the kind of tools only humans create through intentional flaking techniques. But here's what made the team stop cold. The tools appeared at multiple depths, separated by thousands of years of sediment accumulation. People hadn't stumbled on this shelter once during a random migration and moved on. They came back, generation after generation, for millennia. This wasn't a temporary campsite. It was a destination that early humans remembered and deliberately sought out across countless generations. Every inch deeper pushed the timeline further back. The tools stayed consistent with human craftsmanship. The layers stayed intact. Nothing suggested contamination or disturbance. The site followed every rule of proper archaeology while systematically breaking every rule of established history. The team faced a choice. Either the stratigraphy was wrong, but it wasn't. Either the tools were natural, but they weren't. Either something had mixed the deposits, but nothing had. The evidence kept pointing to one conclusion that nobody wanted to accept. Humans occupied this shelter thousands of years before the Clovis timeline allowed. And then they hit the volcanic ash layer. What lay beneath would change everything. The camel that rewrote history. Beneath thick volcanic ash, the team uncovered teeth and jaw fragments. Camelops hesternus, an extinct giant camel that stood 7 feet tall at the shoulder and weighed over a ton. This massive creature roamed North America in herds during the Ice Age before vanishing completely from the fossil record. It disappeared from the continent thousands of years before humans supposedly reached Oregon. Finding camel remains was surprising enough. Where they found them was devastating. The bones weren't scattered randomly like you'd see from a natural death. They weren't gnawed and dispersed by predators competing over a carcass. They clustered tightly in one specific area, arranged in a pattern that only appears when someone butchers an animal systematically for meat, fat, and usable resources. Wind doesn't organize bones this way. Scavengers don't either. Predators drag pieces away to eat in safety. Only humans working efficiently to extract maximum value from a large kill create this concentrated arrangement. Close examination under magnification revealed cut marks on the bones. Not shallow scratches that skeptics could attribute to natural abrasion. Straight, repeated lines concentrated at joints, exactly where you separate meat from skeleton during butchering. This is the signature pattern stone tools leave behind. Nothing else in nature creates marks like these. But skeptics demanded more. They got it. The volcanic ash sealing these remains came from a known Mount St. Helens eruption more than 15,600 years ago. Volcanic ash spreads rapidly across vast distances during major eruptions, settling evenly across the landscape and creating unmistakable time markers. Geologists can fingerprint specific eruptions by analyzing chemical composition. This ash layer was completely intact. Nothing from above had penetrated below. The camel remains sat locked beneath a geological timestamp that nobody could argue away or dismiss as unreliable. The ash told them the bones were at least 15,600 years old, but the team needed precision. They needed to know exactly when this camel died. Then the radiocarbon results came back. Scientists dated the camel tooth enamel directly. Tooth enamel forms during the animal's life and resists contamination far better than bone. The methodology was airtight. The lab conditions were carefully controlled. The result? 18,250 years before present. The Clovis timeline says humans arrived 13,000 years ago. This camel, butchered by humans with clear cut marks from stone tools, died more than 5,000 years before humans were supposed to exist on this continent. The old model didn't bend under the weight of this evidence. It shattered completely. Scientists ran the tests again. Same result. They checked for contamination. Nothing. They examined the stratigraphy one more time. Undisturbed. The camel tooth sat exactly where it had been deposited more than 18,000 years ago, bearing the marks of human butchering, sealed beneath volcanic ash that couldn't lie about its age. The Clovis first defenders had spent decades dismissing pre-Clovis claims. Contaminated samples, they said. Misidentified natural features. Poor methodology. But Rimrock Draw left no room for those objections. The methodology was airtight. The stratigraphy was perfect. The evidence was biological and geological and archaeological all at once. If this discovery is already blowing your mind, hit subscribe, because what they found on the tools is even more disturbing. Blood that survived 18,000 years. The stone tools found with the butchered camel weren't crude rocks grabbed in desperation by starving wanderers. They were carefully crafted scrapers with sharp working edges designed for specific tasks. Someone with skill made these tools, and the material they chose told its own story. Orange agate, a distinctive visually striking stone that doesn't exist anywhere near Rimrock Draw. The local rocks in the surrounding area look completely different in color, texture, and fracture pattern. You couldn't mistake orange agate for anything that occurs naturally within walking distance of the shelter. O'Grady's team also recovered obsidian flake tools. As he put it during excavation, a fresh obsidian flake is the sharpest thing in the world, sharper than any modern surgical steel. These exotic materials traveled dozens or hundreds of miles to reach this shelter. Either these people ranged across vast territories collecting high-quality stone from distant sources, or they maintained trade networks with other groups far away who had access to these materials. Either way, this wasn't desperate survival by lost wanderers stumbling through unfamiliar territory. This was planning, organization, social networks spanning enormous distances. But the real bombshell came from the microscope. When stone tools cut flesh or scrape across hide during butchering, fluids and proteins get forced into tiny cracks and fractures on the tool surface. They dry out and become permanently trapped, preserved for millennia if the conditions cooperate. Scientists call this residue analysis, and it can identify exactly what a tool processed thousands of years after the fact. The team selected scrapers already identified as working tools based on distinctive wear patterns visible under magnification. Tiny fractures followed predictable paths caused by repeated pressure against meat, hide, and bone. These patterns match exactly what experimental archaeologists observe when modern replicas are used to butcher large animals. The rimrock draw tools weren't made and discarded after a single use. They were used extensively, maintained and valued by people who understood their worth. After careful cleaning to remove any modern contamination, the team ran protein residue analysis under controlled laboratory conditions. The technique can identify biological markers still preserved inside ancient stone tools, molecular evidence of exactly what those tools processed. The results matched Bison antiquus, a massive Ice Age bison significantly larger than any modern buffalo, weighing up to 2,000 pounds. This species went extinct thousands of years ago alongside mammoths, giant ground sloths, and the massive camels whose butchered remains lay nearby in the same shelter. This wasn't modern bison blood. The protein signature was specific and unmistakable, different enough from modern species to rule out any possibility of confusion or contamination. That tool cut into a Bison antiquus carcass during the Ice Age, when these enormous animals still roamed the landscape. The evidence locked together in a way that couldn't be dismissed. The stone tools, the butchered animals, and the humans using those tools were now connected biologically, not just by physical proximity in the ground. The tools weren't objects that happened to lie near animal remains by coincidence. They were the actual instruments that acted on those animals. Someone stood at this exact spot, held these carefully crafted stones in their hands, and processed Ice Age megafauna nearly 20,000 years ago. And get this, one scraper came from a sediment layer deeper than the camel remains. In undisturbed stratigraphy, the rule is absolute. Deeper always means older. That tool was deposited before the camel butchering event. Humans were at rimrock draw before 18,250 years ago. The question stopped being whether people were here that early. The question became how much earlier they actually arrived. The timeline dies. The Clovis first model required an ice-free corridor between the Laurentide and Cordilleran ice sheets. That's how humans supposedly walked from Alaska to the continental interior 13,000 years ago. The theory dominated archaeology for most of the 20th century. At 18,250 years ago, that corridor didn't exist. North America sat locked in the last glacial maximum. Ice sheets covered most of Canada and blocked the western interior completely. The Laurentide and Cordilleran glaciers hadn't separated yet. The pathway that Clovis first demanded simply wasn't there. At the time, humans were already living in Oregon, hunting giant camels and processing their kills with sophisticated stone tools. But humans were here anyway. The evidence at rimrock draw proves it. Only one explanation fits the dates and the physical landscape: coastal migration. Even during peak glacial conditions, the Pacific coastline remained partially accessible. Sea levels dropped dramatically because so much water was locked up in continental glaciers, exposing coastal shelves and creating passages along the shore. Kelp forests provided continuous food-rich environments that could support human movement southward. Fish, shellfish, sea mammals, seabirds. A highway of protein stretching down the Pacific coast. This route required watercraft, navigation skills, the ability to build boats that could survive ocean conditions and carry families along treacherous coastlines for hundreds of miles. For decades, scientists flatly denied early Americans possessed these capabilities. Ice Age people weren't sophisticated enough, they claimed. They couldn't build seaworthy vessels. They couldn't navigate without landmarks. The whole idea seemed absurd to researchers committed to the Clovis model. Rimrock draw proves they had exactly those capabilities. These people weren't desperate wanderers stumbling blind through unfamiliar territory. They selected specific locations based on detailed knowledge of terrain, water sources, and seasonal resources. They understood complex survival needs in one of the harshest environments North America ever experienced during human occupation. They created sophisticated tools from materials transported across vast distances. They hunted 7-foot camels and 2,000-pound ancient bison, megafauna requiring coordinated group effort and refined killing techniques to bring down. Nobody expected Ice Age hunters to be this advanced. They were wrong, and here's what keeps archaeologists up at night. The camel tooth, dated to 18,250 years, isn't at the bottom of Rimrock Draw. Deeper sediment layers contain stone fragments and indicators of human activity that haven't been fully analyzed yet. O'Grady noted they haven't found the larger game they expect were attracted to the wetland refugia at the site during the Ice Age. The shelter probably served as a gathering point where water drew both humans and megafauna together. There may be mammoth remains down there. There may be evidence of even earlier occupation, pushing the timeline back further than current estimates suggest. Excavation hasn't reached bottom. Limited funding and preservation concerns have prevented full exposure of the deepest levels. Each untouched layer might contain tools, remains, or evidence that could rewrite the story again. The oldest evidence at this site is still in the ground, waiting to be discovered. What we almost missed. O'Grady called Rimrock Draw probably the most important track site in the Americas, both in geographical scale and frequency of evidence showing repeated human activity across thousands of years. The evidence isn't isolated or ambiguous like many controversial pre-Clovis sites that skeptics dismissed over the decades. It spans multiple layers with consistent tool types, butchered megafauna, and biological proof locked inside the stone. But here's the disturbing part. This evidence existed for decades while researchers dismissed the entire region as irrelevant, too cold, too harsh, too far from where humans supposedly lived during the Ice Age. The Clovis model told them not to look here, so they didn't look. They drove past sites like Rimrock Draw on their way to locations that fit the accepted timeline. They dug in places where they expected to find Clovis points and ignored vast regions that their theory said couldn't contain early human evidence. The bias was systematic. Funding went to Clovis-era sites. Publications favored Clovis-consistent findings. Pre-Clovis claims got scrutinized with hostility, while Clovis claims sailed through peer review. An entire generation of archaeologists was trained to see the world through a lens that may have been fundamentally wrong. How many other sites got ignored because they fell outside accepted expectations? How many discoveries sit unexcavated beneath soil and volcanic ash because scientists weren't expecting to find evidence that old? How much of America's true prehistory remains buried simply because the wrong theory dominated the field for so long? The timeline of human settlement in North America is no longer stable. What textbooks taught as established fact for generations has been revealed as incomplete and possibly wrong about fundamental questions. Regions dismissed as irrelevant now demand fresh investigation with updated expectations about what might lie beneath. Deeper deposits previously ignored as too old to matter may contain human activity predating known sites by thousands of years. Every assumption needs to be questioned. Every site needs to be re-evaluated with fresh eyes. Archaeologists can no longer assume upper layers contain the earliest evidence. They can no longer dismiss regions as too harsh for Ice Age habitation. They can no longer claim early Americans lacked the sophistication to build boats, navigate coastlines, or organize complex societies. Rimrock Draw buried all those assumptions along with the old timeline. Rimrock Draw isn't an anomaly that can be explained away or dismissed as contamination. It's the first crack in a much larger truth that has been waiting beneath the surface for thousands of years. 19,800 years of human presence in Oregon. Stone tools carrying the blood of animals extinct for 15,000 years. Butchered megafauna with cut marks that only humans make. Volcanic ash sealing evidence that was never supposed to exist beneath a geological timestamp that cannot be denied or argued away. The old timeline is dead. The Clovis first model that dominated American archaeology for most of the 20th century cannot survive evidence this clear, this well-documented, this impossible to dismiss. The new story of America's first people is just beginning to be told, and every excavation at sites like Rimrock Draw has the potential to push that story back even further into the depths of the Ice Age, revealing a human presence on this continent that may prove far more ancient than anyone has yet dared to imagine. The first Americans arrived thousands of years earlier than anyone believed. They built boats, they navigated coastlines, they hunted megafauna and established territories that they returned to generation after generation. The evidence has been waiting beneath the surface this whole time. If you want to see more discoveries that rewrite human history, subscribe and hit the bell. The ground beneath our feet holds secrets that are only beginning to surface. And the next find could change everything we think we know once again.